What if I told you that while the world kept rushing by, heaven paused because of you? That this very morning, when your lips whispered a quiet prayer, raw and unpolished, something in the spiritual realm shifted. You didn't just go through a routine. You stepped into a sacred appointment, and the Almighty God leaned in to listen. Sometimes it's not the volume of our voice that stirs the heavens. It's the volume of our surrender, and this morning yours roared. There's something sacred about the kind of prayer that isn't rehearsed. When your heart speaks before your head can edit, when the ache within spills out without filter, that is where the supernatural begins. That's when the incense rises. Revelation 5 verse 8 tells us that the prayers of the saints are collected in golden bowls in heaven. That means your words weren't lost in the air. They were caught, held, and treasured in the courts of God. You didn't just pray, you poured. The beauty of this moment isn't in its eloquence, it's in its honesty. Your whisper of God, "I need you," carried more weight than 1,000 scripted words. Like Hannah in 1 Samuel 1 verse 13 to 15, who prayed with trembling lips and a desperate soul. You weren't performing, you were pouring out. And God noticed. He always does when the prayer comes from a place of raw truth and open hands. This wasn't just another morning. Heaven marked it. The angels recorded it. Why? Because you proved something powerful. Your heart is His. Not because you shouted the loudest, not because you were perfect, but because you came as you are, surrendered and sincere. And that's what moves God. That's what opens doors in the unseen. That's what causes divine movement in places you haven't even prayed for yet. Right now, even if your surroundings seem unchanged, trust this. The spiritual world is already at work. Isaiah 65 verse 24 promises that before you even call, He answers, and while you are still speaking, He hears. So don't be surprised if the next few days feel different. Don't be alarmed when you start sensing favor in unfamiliar places or peace in the middle of chaos. The seed was sown in secret, but the harvest is coming in public. You activated something this morning. That pain you confessed, that fear you handed over, that worship you gave when it hurt the most, that wasn't just heard. It was honored. Because God isn't looking for performance. He's searching for proximity. And your closeness drew Him near. So let this truth settle in your spirit today. Heaven responded. Not because of your perfection, but because of your posture. You didn't impress God, you invited Him. And He never turns down an honest invitation. Your tears were not wasted. Your hope was not naive. Your waiting is not in vain. This was not just a prayer, it was a transaction. It was a turning point. It was a supernatural handshake between your earthly faith and His divine will. And as of this morning, the process of heaven's response is already unfolding. Friend, some mornings don't announce themselves with thunder or visions, yet something eternal still shifts. And today, in the quiet place where no one saw but God, something holy happened. You may not have felt the earth move beneath your feet, but heaven recorded every word. Every sigh, every tear, every groan you released in that sacred space wasn't overlooked. It was secured. That wasn't ordinary prayer. That was eternal transaction. In the courts of heaven, your name was mentioned. Psalm 56 verse 8 declares that God collects our tears in His bottle and records them in His book. Can you imagine that not one drop of sorrow went unnoticed? Every groan you couldn't put into words, every whisper too weak to echo through your room, rose as incense and found its way into the vault of the Almighty. Heaven doesn't dismiss your ache, it treasures it. There's a divine intimacy found in prayers that come from broken places. When you come before the Lord without pretense, without performance, just raw and surrendered, that is worship. That is warfare. Romans 8 verse 26 reminds us that when we don't know what to pray, the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. So even when you thought you were stumbling through your prayer, heaven heard it with perfect clarity. Think of Malachi 3 verse 16, where it says that those who feared the Lord spoke with one another, and the Lord listened and heard them, and a book of remembrance was written before him. That's what happened today. Your words became ink in the records of glory. God leaned in not because your words were loud, but because your heart was laid bare. Let this sink deep. God responds to humility, not eloquence. He honors hunger, not hype. You weren't trying to impress him, you were inviting him. And the moment you did, all of heaven aligned to respond. When you brought your honesty, your weakness, your need, God saw that as worship. Because only those who trust deeply dare to pray boldly in the midst of brokenness. Hannah's story echoes that truth. She didn't come with a polished speech. She came with pain that couldn't be masked. Her lips moved, but her voice was gone. Yet heaven recorded it, and the trajectory of her life and Israel's history was changed forever. That's the kind of reverence your prayer carried this morning. You may have felt weak, but God saw it as weighty. This is the place where intimacy with God forms. Not on the mountaintops of spiritual performance, but in the low valleys of simple surrendered faith. God doesn't need volume to validate your prayer. He looks for sincerity. When you show up empty, desperate, unfiltered, he fills that space with power. Heaven doesn't store things temporarily. It seals what matters eternally. And your prayer, birthed in vulnerability and shaped by surrender, is now part of heaven's strategy for your life. You didn't pray small today, you prayed legacy. You didn't just whisper into the air, you touched eternity. And while the earth may still look the same, you are not. Something has shifted in the spirit. The throne room heard your name. The angels paused. And God, the righteous judge and loving Father, leaned close and said, I see you, I've heard you, and I will respond. And not every breakthrough begins with a trumpet. Sometimes it begins with a trembling whisper from a heart wide open. And when your voice rose this morning, not in noise but in truth, it didn't just pass through the air, it pierced heaven. You didn't just ask for God's hand to move, you gave him something far greater, your heart. There's a realm of prayer that transcends petitions and lists. It's where the soul communes with the Father, where desperation gives birth to devotion. That's what happened in that sacred space this morning. You didn't negotiate with God, you surrendered. You didn't try to manipulate a miracle, you became the altar where he could move. This is the kind of prayer God doesn't just hear, he feels. He's not a cold, distant ruler looking to fulfill requests like a divine vending machine. He's a father whose heart is moved when his child comes near, not with polish, but with purity. When Psalm 34 verse 18 tells us that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted, it's not poetic filler, it's divine truth. And this morning that closeness was activated. You didn't recite a formula, you revealed your soul. That's what caught heaven's attention. In John 11 verse 35 it simply says, Jesus wept. The Son of God, the King of Kings, wept, not because he was powerless, but because he was present. He felt the pain of his friends. He didn't just show up to fix the problem, he showed up to feel it with them. That's the kind of God who met you this morning, the one who feels with you before he fixes anything around you. Some of the most powerful movements of God aren't born from eloquent declarations, they're birthed in moments of unfiltered honesty. It wasn't your perfection that moved him. It was your proximity. It wasn't your articulation, it was your affection. And when you poured it out, heaven responded with holy nearness. Jeremiah 29 verse 12 to 13 echoes this heart connection clearly. Then you will call upon me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. That's what happened. You found him not because you had the right words, but because you brought the right heart. There's a holy beauty in that kind of surrender. When you come to the throne not with entitlement, but with trust. When you approach not with demands, but with devotion. That's when something shifts. Because the purpose of prayer isn't just to change your situation, it's to change your position. It draws you closer to the one who holds all things, including your next miracle, in his hand. When you prayed this morning, God didn't lean away. He leaned in. He didn't analyze your request. He felt your heart. He didn't measure your words. He measured your surrender. And in that sacred exchange, something divine was set in motion, not because you persuaded him, but because you moved him. And that's the miracle behind the miracle. Not that God's hand was stirred, but that his heart was touched. And once his heart is moved, his power follows. That's what love does. It moves, it breaks barriers, and it manifests in ways we can't calculate. Real prayers release real power because they are rooted not in performance, but in relationship. You reached God this morning not with volume, but with vulnerability. And now what you touched in heaven will begin to transform what you see on earth. Some of the loudest shifts in heaven are triggered by the quietest moments on earth. While the noise of the world kept spinning, notifications ringing, headlines scrolling, chaos unfolding, you were doing something that didn't make headlines but made history. You bowed your head, you opened your mouth, and heaven moved. Your prayer was not background noise to God, it was a spiritual earthquake. What you whispered in faith this morning created a ripple through realms you cannot see. It may have felt like just another quiet moment, but in the unseen chains began to rattle, bondages cracked, angelic reinforcements were dispatched. Because when a child of God prays with purity, authority is unleashed. There is no such thing as a small prayer when it comes from a surrendered heart. In Daniel 10, verse 12 to 13, we're shown the weight of a single prayer. Daniel had barely finished speaking when heaven responded. The angel said, "From the first day that you set your heart to understand and humbled yourself before your God, your words were heard." But there had been resistance in the unseen realm, a spiritual war that delayed the visible answer. That's what most people miss. The battle isn't always visible, but it's real, and prayer is what shakes the foundation beneath it. Your words this morning didn't just reach God, they disrupted demonic activity. They confronted lies that had been sitting unchallenged. They declared territory that had been occupied by darkness for too long. The enemy doesn't tremble at church attendance or polished theology, but he trembles at prayer, especially when it comes from someone who still shows up to God despite unanswered questions, despite battles, despite pain. You may not have felt fire when you prayed. You may not have seen a vision or heard a thunderclap, but in the spirit a shockwave went out. Like in Acts 12, verse 5 to 7, when the early church prayed for Peter in prison, something shifted without explanation. He was bound by chains, surrounded by guards, locked behind iron gates, and yet prayer broke through every layer of opposition. A light filled the cell. An angel showed up. Chains fell. Doors opened, and no one could stop it. That's the kind of power you stirred this morning. Matthew 18, verse 18 reminds us that whatever we bind on earth is bound in heaven, and whatever we loose on earth is loosed in heaven. That's not just poetic language, it's kingdom protocol. You opened your mouth and authorized heaven's movement in your situation. You might not see the effects yet, but the aftershocks are coming. Think about that. While the world was chasing likes and algorithms, you shook eternity. While people were rehearsing fear and feeding doubt, you released declarations that broke open spiritual gates. While others were waiting to feel perfect before approaching God, you showed up raw, real, and ready. And that kind of surrender causes spiritual tremors. Don't let your feelings deceive you. The enemy will whisper that nothing happened, that it was just words, that nothing has changed. But the reality is this: Every spiritual breakthrough begins underground. Just like an earthquake starts deep beneath the surface before anything moves above it, so does your prayer life. What erupted this morning in the unseen will soon be impossible to miss in the visible. You moved heaven and shook hell simply by choosing to pray anyway, despite what you've been through, despite how tired your soul may feel, despite unanswered prayers in the past. You lifted your voice and gave God permission to invade earth through your faith. That's not routine. That's warfare. That's not ritual. That's revolution. So don't minimize what happened just because you can't see it yet. The Spirit of God is already moving through the cracks your words opened. Angels are on assignment. Walls are weakening. Chains are loosening. And breakthrough is en route, not because you shouted the loudest, but because you believed the deepest. This wasn't just a morning prayer. This was a seismic move in the Spirit. And while others go about their day unaware, you need to know heaven is still reverberating with the sound of your yes. Friend, while tremors of your whispered prayer still echo in the Spirit, something even more powerful unfolded in that sacred moment you stepped into a legacy. Not a legacy of fame or earthly recognition, but one rooted in eternity. When you bowed your heart this morning, you weren't alone. You joined hands unseen but unmistakably real with a great cloud of witnesses whose lives were marked by holy fire and unwavering faith. You entered the ranks of those who didn't just pray, they changed the course of history through it. You became part of a lineage that stretches back through the pages of Scripture. Men and women who stood in the gap, who lifted their voices when silence was safer, who dared to believe God when doubt was the culture. You stood where Elijah stood, not geographically, but spiritually. James 5, verse 17 to 18 reminds us that Elijah was a man just like us, and yet his prayers shut up the heavens and then released the rain. He didn't have a title that made his words powerful. He had a trust that made heaven move. And so do you. That moment you knelt this morning was more than devotion. It was inheritance. Hannah's silent cry in 1 Samuel birthed a prophet. David's psalms, born from sleepless nights and battle-worn days, became the soundtrack of countless generations. And you, yes, you now pray with that same holy weight. You may feel small in your kitchen or quiet in your bedroom, but you're thundering across the heavens. You're standing in footprints worn deep by saints who refuse to stop believing. You may not have seen fire fall like Mount Carmel. You may not have watched a Red Sea split. But don't be fooled, your prayer carries that same authority, because the God you pray to has not changed. Luke 18, verse 7 to 8 tells us that God hears the cries of his elect and will bring justice for them quickly. It's not about volume. It's about endurance. Heaven moves when faith refuses to be quiet. Your persistence this morning placed you among those God calls his own. There's something powerful about knowing that the Spirit who stirred Paul in prison, who filled Peter with boldness, who opened Lydia's heart in a prayer meeting, is the same Spirit that stirred your soul this morning. You didn't start something, you continued something. Your prayer is not isolated. It's interwoven with thousands who came before you and thousands who will come after. Hebrews 12 verse 1 calls them a great cloud of witnesses, and they cheer you on because they know the cost and the reward of a life surrendered in prayer. And here's the beauty of this legacy. It's not about perfection. It's about persistence. Those prayer warriors you joined didn't always get it right. They didn't always feel strong, but they refused to stop showing up. That's what you did this morning. You showed up. With your tears, your questions, your faith hanging on by a thread, but you showed up. And in doing so, you picked up the mantle. That mantle is not heavy with pressure, it's heavy with promise. It holds the weight of hope, the trust of those who came before, and the authority of the God who called you. When you pray, you're not echoing into emptiness. You're adding to the sound of generations that have cried out, "Thy kingdom come," and watched heaven answer. Your voice now joins the rhythm of that eternal intercession. The baton is in your hands, and every whispered amen adds another stroke to the masterpiece God is painting through history. The saints in glory aren't finished speaking, they're speaking through you. Your prayers have become part of a legacy that doesn't retire, it only multiplies. When you prayed this morning, you did more than seek comfort or answers. You stepped into your calling. You became an echo of eternity. You didn't just talk to God, you walked with giants. You aligned with warriors. You reminded the heavens that faith is still alive on the earth. And that whisper, that simple act of faith, it was enough to awaken the archives of heaven and remind the enemy the prayer warriors are still rising. The wind doesn't announce a storm, but you can feel the pressure shift. And that's what happened the moment you opened your mouth to pray. Without theatrics, without a spotlight, something in the atmosphere changed. Unseen forces took their positions. Angelic hosts drew swords. The war room of heaven lit up. Because one surrendered prayer uttered in faith ignites a battle that shakes foundations far beyond what eyes can see. Prayer is not a ritual. It's not a feel-good spiritual discipline. It's a weapon. It's a declaration of war. Ephesians 6 verse 12 reminds us that our fight isn't against flesh and blood, it's against principalities, powers, rulers of darkness and spiritual wickedness in high places. And when you pray, you enter that battlefield. But here's the truth. The enemy hopes you forget. You're not fighting for victory. You're fighting from it. What looked like a whisper in your room this morning was in the spirit realm a trumpet blast. And that sound awakened both heaven's help and hell's resistance. Yes, resistance. Because any time you align with God's will, there will be a counterattack. That's not defeat. It's confirmation that your prayer hit the target. Take Daniel, for example. In Daniel 10, verse 12 to 13, his prayer was heard the moment he set his heart toward God. But the manifestation didn't show up immediately. Why? Because spiritual warfare was taking place in the heavens. A demonic prince resisted the angelic response for 21 days. Yet the answer had already been released. Delayed, yes. Denied, never. And your situation may feel the same. You're not being ignored, you're being contended for. When you prayed, you launched an offensive, and every stronghold the enemy thought was secure started shaking. That addiction, that fear, that generational curse, it felt the hit. 2 Corinthians 10 verse 4 says, "The weapons we fight with are not carnal, but mighty through God, for the pulling down of strongholds." And that's exactly what your faith did. It pulled down something ancient, something rooted, something that's held ground for too long. You didn't see it crumble yet, but it cracked. And one more prayer might bring it down entirely. Your prayer life has now entered a new dimension, not just communion with God, but confrontation with darkness. That's not something to fear. It's something to embrace. Because the very moment you decided to believe God over your feelings, over what you see, over what people say, you stepped into the center of a supernatural clash. And your persistence in prayer is part of the strategy for victory. 2 Chronicles 20 verse 15 says, "The battle is not yours, but God's." And yet God chooses to partner with your prayer to bring it to completion. That means your words, your declarations, your praise, your groaning, they are strategic strikes against the enemy's camp. Every time you pray, you drop a spiritual hammer. Every time you worship, you fire another arrow. Every time you declare God's truth, you disarm another lie. So if it feels like there's pressure today, if delays are intensifying, if weariness tries to cloud your faith, know this. It's not because nothing's happening. It's because something is. The resistance you feel is proof of the movement you caused. Satan doesn't resist prayers that are powerless. He resists the ones that are tearing down walls, opening heaven and releasing destiny. Stand firm. Keep praying. Keep pressing. The opposition is not greater than the one who goes before you. He is the Lord of hosts, the commander of angel armies. And when he moves, nothing can stand against him. Every spiritual force that's been assigned to your destruction is now confronting the force of your obedience. And obedience always wins. You are not abandoned in this fight. You are backed by heaven, armored in truth, strengthened by grace, covered in the blood of Jesus. You're not a weak Christian trying to hold on. You are a warrior drenched in victory, swinging the sword of the Spirit with every prayer you release. So pray again. Worship louder. Declare truth, because the spiritual battle is shifting, and it's shifting in your favor. Beloved, stillness isn't always stagnation, it's often strategy. What you're calling a delay, God calls design. And while it may seem like nothing is moving around you, heaven has been anything but still. You may not feel the shift yet, but there is a holy momentum building behind the scenes. Every tick of the clock is divine choreography working together for a moment that will be both breathtaking and undeniably God. Waiting is not a punishment, it's preparation. I know you've prayed, I know you've fasted, I know you've stayed faithful even when answers didn't come. But let me declare this boldly over you: you are not behind, you are not forgotten, you are not overlooked. The waiting room of heaven is not where dreams die, it's where warriors are formed. Habakkuk 2 verse 3 says, "Though the vision tarry, wait for it. It will surely come, it will not delay." And that's not just poetic encouragement, it's prophetic assurance. God delays on purpose. Why? Because he's more concerned with what he's building in you than what he's delivering to you. If he gave you the promise too early, it would crush you instead of crown you. Just as a tree must develop deep roots before it bears lasting fruit, your spirit must be fortified in seasons where nothing seems to change. But don't be fooled, roots are still growing. In fact, the most powerful transformation happens underground, where no applause can reach and no spotlight shines. Waiting has a way of exposing your foundation. It reveals whether you worship for results or relationship. Psalm 27 verse 14 reminds us to wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Yes, wait for the Lord. God uses these seemingly uneventful moments to strengthen your backbone of faith, not just your wish list of blessings. When you feel stretched, it's because he's expanding your capacity to carry glory, not just gifts. And here's the incredible news: just because you're waiting doesn't mean heaven is. Every day you're pressing in, something is shifting in the spirit. Angels are moving, doors are aligning, hearts are being prepared. The answer isn't no, it's not yet. Because when it comes, it won't arrive piecemeal. It will be full, complete, undeniable, and drenched in glory. There's a holy tension in the wait. Romans 8 verse 25 paints it beautifully. If we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. This kind of waiting isn't passive, it's prophetic. It's you standing with open hands saying, "God, I trust you more than I trust my timeline." That is maturity. That is faith, refined by fire. And that is what heaven responds to. So no, you're not just sitting in the dark. You're becoming someone who can carry the light without being destroyed by its weight. You're being readied for a miracle that won't just bless you, it will overflow into others. Your story is becoming a testimony that will preach louder than 1,000 sermons, because it wasn't microwaved in impatience. It was marinated in trust. In seasons like this, silence can feel loud. You cry out and hear nothing. But faith isn't built on how loud God speaks. It's built on whether you trust him when he whispers or waits. And even when it feels quiet, his hands are still crafting. Heaven's timing is not on pause, it's on purpose. You may think you're in the background, but God is placing you center stage for something you didn't see coming. The longer the wait, the greater the unveiling. He's setting you up for a suddenly that will make the wait make sense. Because when God moves, it's not random, it's revolutionary. And what's coming to your life is not delayed. It's being delivered in perfect condition at a perfect time. There's something different about you now, and whether others can name it or not, they will feel it. What you did this morning wasn't small, wasn't casual, and certainly wasn't invisible. You opened your mouth, aligned your heart, and released heaven into your environment. And when a believer truly prays, the air around them shifts. Not just metaphorically, but spiritually, tangibly, atmospherically. That room you sat in to pray, it's not the same anymore. Your tears baptized that space in power. Your words rewrote the atmosphere. Prayer doesn't just change people, it transforms places. It's not limited to internal healing. It causes spiritual earthquakes in the unseen realm. When Jesus said in Matthew 5, verse 14 to 16, that you are the light of the world, he wasn't offering encouragement. He was releasing an identity. Light doesn't ask permission to shine. It doesn't whisper to darkness before breaking through. Light invades. And that's what your prayer did this morning. You didn't just glow, you pierced. You didn't just shift your emotions, you confronted the spirit realm. God has placed authority inside you, and that authority is not for decoration, it's for demonstration. You don't need a microphone to be powerful. You don't need a pulpit to be effective. When you prayed, your spirit stood up, even if your body was weary. When you whispered, that surrender angels moved into formation, and demons that were hiding in comfort zones had to flee. The air in your home now hosts peace where confusion once lived. The corners of your workplace are now being invaded by clarity, boldness, and favor because someone dared to pray. Atmosphere isn't just a vibe, it's a realm, and realms bow to spiritual authority. Joshua and his army didn't win Jericho through force alone. They shifted the atmosphere through obedience and praise. When the people shouted, the walls fell. Joshua 6, verse 20. There is something explosive about a spirit fully surrendered in faith. And the echo of your prayer this morning is still reverberating in rooms you haven't even entered yet. Don't underestimate what you carry. You're not just a believer, you're a breaker. You're not just saved, you're sent. You don't just attend church, you carry church. When you walk into a room, there should be a difference, not because you announced it, but because heaven did. Mark 11, verse 23 to 24 declares that if you speak to the mountain and do not doubt in your heart, it will move. Mountains don't respond to volume, they respond to authority. And when you operate under heaven's authority, you don't shift because of the atmosphere, you shift the atmosphere. You may not have noticed it yet, but the air around you has changed. That tension in your home is lifting. That heaviness in your workplace is breaking. That cloud over your heart is thinning. Why? Because you welcomed the Spirit of God into the space through your obedience. When you called on His name, you didn't just get comfort, you became a conduit. And now everything around you must adjust to what's inside of you. This is how revival begins, not in stadiums, but in secret places. Not with microphones, but with whispered prayers. Revival is the product of atmosphere being prepared for heaven's activity. And that's exactly what your spirit initiated this morning. You might have still felt tired. You might have questioned if it even worked. But let me tell you, it worked. Because faith doesn't always feel like fire. Sometimes it feels like stillness that stirs the winds of change. So go ahead and walk boldly into rooms today. Not because you're trying to prove anything, but because your spirit already shifted something. Prayer isn't passive. It's movement. It's not weak. It's warfare. When you lift your voice in alignment with heaven, the unseen realm doesn't just take notice, it takes orders. And today, whether in your kitchen, your office, your school, or even in your car, you are not walking into a neutral zone. You are stepping into spaces as a carrier of divine presence. This morning you became a thermostat in a world full of thermometers. You're not adjusting to the temperature, you're setting it. You are now an atmosphere shifter, and everything around you is feeling the ripple effect. And while others measure progress by what they can see, we are called to believe in what we cannot. Faith doesn't wait for confirmation. It creates it. This very moment, though, your surroundings may appear unchanged. Heaven is in full motion on your behalf. Angels are on assignment. Strategies are being deployed. Connections are being aligned. You may feel like you're in the dark, but let me assure you, God works wonders in hidden places. It's not always in the spotlight that heaven shifts. Sometimes the loudest miracles begin in silence. The roots of answered prayer don't grow in the open. They dig deep in secret beneath the surface of time and understanding. What looks quiet in your life is actually sacred ground being prepared for divine eruption. Psalm 121 verse 4 reminds us that he who watches over you never slumbers nor sleeps. So while you're waiting, God is working. While you're praying, heaven is moving. While you're questioning, the Spirit is orchestrating answers with exact precision. You don't need to see it to believe it. You need to trust it to receive it. That's what faith is. Hebrews tells us that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And right now, even if it doesn't feel like it, evidence is being formed. Contracts are being written. Phone calls are being arranged. Hearts are being softened. People you've never met are about to walk into your life as part of the miracle God is fashioning. There's a powerful moment in 2 Kings 6, verse 16 to 17, where Elisha tells his fearful servant, "Do not be afraid, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them." And then he prayed, "Lord, open his eyes that he may see." Suddenly the servant saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire surrounding them. The truth had always been there. The visibility was the only thing delayed. That's where many of us stand today. The supernatural activity of God is already surrounding us, but our eyes haven't caught up to it yet. This is where trust becomes your lifeline. You can't build your confidence on updates or outward signs. You must anchor it in God's character. Romans 8 verse 28 doesn't say, "All things will feel good." It says, "All things work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose." That means God isn't wasting time, he's weaving it. Every moment of stillness is part of heaven's timeline of divine collision. Some of the greatest moves of God begin without announcement. Think of Esther hidden in the palace, Joseph forgotten in the prison, Moses raised in Pharaoh's household. All invisible seasons, all vital, and all orchestrated for maximum impact. Your hidden place is not punishment, it's preparation. Your silence isn't evidence of abandonment, it's the soundproof room of God's greatest work. Right now, there is activity in realms your natural mind can't access. You may not hear thunder or see lightning, but the heavens are shifting. Miracles are being cultivated in silence, not spectacle. And while others are chasing visible success, you are standing in invisible strength. Because you dared to pray, even when it didn't feel effective. Because you chose to believe, even when you couldn't calculate results. That kind of faith shakes foundations. I want you to remember this. The moment you prayed, something broke open. It may not have been a door in front of you, but it was a chain around you. It may not have been a response from people, but it was a release from heaven. Your cry didn't echo into nothingness. It registered in the courts of glory. God is not passive toward you. He is intentional, involved, and in motion even now. So take courage, beloved. The silence is not abandonment, it's strategy. The wait is not a void, it's a vault where God is storing glory. Don't let the lack of noise confuse you into thinking there's a lack of movement. Behind the curtain of what you can see, the King is preparing a moment that will leave you breathless. The invisible stage is almost set. and your miracle is closer than you think. Friend, some things shift quietly before they ever shout. By the time you see the evidence, heaven's already been working behind the curtain. And right now, I want you to hear me with your spirit, more than your ears. Your breakthrough has already begun. That's not hype. That's truth. That's a heaven-certified announcement wrapped in earthly timing. You're not waiting for the miracle to start. You're walking through the middle of it. What the enemy fears most is your realization of progress. He can't stop what God has started, but he will try to blind you from recognizing it. Because if you knew what had already begun to break open on your behalf, you'd stop pacing and start praising. You'd stop wondering when God will move and start realizing he already has. You'd wake up in the middle of that same hard season, but with resurrection in your eyes. Breakthrough doesn't always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it tiptoes in while you're still wiping tears from your face. But that doesn't make it any less real. Philippians 1 verse 6 reminds us that he who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. That means the miracle doesn't just start well, it finishes in fullness. God doesn't initiate revival in your life and walk away mid-process. No, what he ignites, he carries to completion. And make no mistake, this morning wasn't just a devotional moment, it was an ignition. The kind of moment where prayers collide with prophecy, where faith reaches into the unseen and pulls something forward that couldn't be delayed any longer. There was a chain reaction in the spirit when you opened your heart to God today. Your surrender caused heaven to release what had been held for the right timing. Not only is the door unlocking, the hallway behind it is shifting, aligning with heaven's blueprint for your life. Isaiah 55 verse 11 declares that God's word will not return void. It will accomplish what he desires and achieve the purpose for which he sent it. That means every promise he ever whispered over your life is under divine fulfillment. Even if your current reality doesn't reflect it yet, the process is already unfolding. Think of it like a sunrise. Long before the sun breaks the horizon, the sky starts changing color. Your breakthrough is already tinting the edges of your life with heaven's glow. And yes, the battle might still be visible, but don't let that fool you. You're not fighting for victory, you're walking from it. There's a massive difference. 2 Corinthians 2 verse 14 says that God always leads us in triumph. That means triumph isn't something you chase. It's something you follow. You're not trying to win what God already claimed, you're learning to walk in what's already yours. This moment isn't the beginning of God's favor on you. It's the unveiling of what's been brewing for a long time. Like seeds planted in the soil, breakthroughs germinate underground. They push, crack, and stretch in unseen places before bursting into view. What you're experiencing now is the push. You may feel the pressure. You may feel resistance, but pressure isn't a stop sign, it's the pulse of progress. Everything God does is layered with intention. Your obedience, your surrender, your persistence in prayer, all of it has activated something irreversible. Heaven has already said yes. That yes may look like closed doors becoming bridges. It may show up as peace in places that once triggered anxiety. It might even appear first in your mindset before it manifests in your bank account, your health, or your relationships. But it's coming, because it's already begun. Right now, I want you to take a deep breath, not in resignation, but in recognition. This is not the same spiritual territory you stood in yesterday. The soil has shifted. The climate has changed. You are not where you were even if your feet haven't moved yet. The atmosphere has been rewritten because the spiritual contract was signed in your obedience. You're not hoping anymore, you're harvesting. You're not begging, you're believing. And the evidence is closer than it's ever been. Heaven has already poured the oil. Now the jar of your life is catching it drop by drop until overflow becomes undeniable. Some things don't stop once they're released, they ripple. That quiet moment of surrender you gave to God this morning wasn't just heard, it was launched. It moved through the heavens like a wave crashing against the shore of eternity. And here's what you need to know now. It's still moving. That whisper, that sigh, that tear-laced yes, didn't stay in the room where you spoke it. It was caught by heaven and echoed into your future. You may not have felt the thunder when you prayed, but the impact was seismic in the spirit. God isn't a passive observer. He's a responding Father. James 5 verse 16 reminds us that the prayers of the righteous are powerful and effective. That means when you prayed with a